Kirsten, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on with you.
So glad to have you. Yeah, and it's always a pleasure. Conservation biologist. We're going to talk about the new book by Bill McKibben and kind of riff off of that in terms of ways to hopefully address, I don't know whether to call it climate collapse, climate crisis, people call it global warming. Do you have a preferred term for this dynamic?
Oh, crisis, I think accurately conveys the urgency of the situation, the climate crisis.
Yeah, it's really tough. And I always said, Kirsten, that the climate crisis was the most serious issue we face. I have to say, in recent years, the genocide in Gaza has kind of supplanted it in my mind. Perhaps worldwide, we can certainly say the climate catastrophe affects all of us in ways that maybe a genocide in one corner of the world doesn't, but I think the implications of our inhumanity to each other, as shown in Palestine, does have those kind of worldwide global implications.
Absolutely. It's hard to watch what's unfolding without seriously questioning our ability to live together in any way as a species.
Do you think that, that's really raised a very important question. Do you think our kind of, is self-destruction in our genes? I mean, is that just part of being a really intelligent species that competes for scarce resources and that the organism benefits from taking those scarce resources and aggregating them and accumulating them for oneself? Does that kind of mean we really are doomed?
There's different schools of thought on that. There's been instances in history where we surprisingly we behaved more communitarian than you would have expected, more altruistically than you would have expected. There's lots of examples of that. We're sure not behaving that way now, and maybe it gets harder and harder the more resource scarcity there is. The Middle East is a place where it's difficult to get enough water, grow enough food. Population pressures may, I think certainly make it harder for us to feel the security, the inner security that allows us to behave altruistically. So I don't think we're intrinsically doomed. I think aspects of our development, like namely the discovery of fossil fuels 200 years ago that allowed us to just explode in our population, have made it difficult to find a sustainable way to continue to live together.
Well, let's just quickly look at the numbers from Gaza. I do this every program. I feel it's a moral obligation. And it's interesting, the death count has actually seemed to have fallen back a little bit from just absolute ugliness to still ugliness, but not quite as awful, not hundreds a day or over 100 days we were seeing just a few weeks ago, with the occupation now in full scale there in Gaza. 37 reported dead by the Ministry of Health yesterday as Israel is occupying all of Gaza. The entire region has been leveled, and I have a count. This is obviously very undercounting. 65,419 and over 12,835 are the fault of the responsibility of Trump and Netanyahu. So and that's just the official number. We know from the Lancet, from the Guardian, from Doctors Against Genocide who've been on the ground that the number's almost certainly much higher, maybe by an order of magnitude higher.
I so appreciate you bringing that awareness to all of us, and I so admire your ability to deal in those realities every day, as I know you do on your show, because at the very beginning of the genocide, I was very involved. I was reading everything I could. I was learning the history. I was learning about how this did not start on October 7th. This has been a genocide since 1948, and And I think, like a lot of us, as time has gone on and just the relentless grinding brutality and the entire world doing nothing has gotten to me, to where I filter out a little bit of the news. But I so appreciate you continuing to bring it to all of us, because the least we can do is bear witness, and a lot more: boycott, divest, protest, do everything humanly possible.
I think we do filter it out. I mean, how can we not? You have to live, and you have to see some beauty and some joy in life. We all try to get that, and it is tough in these times. I've certainly questioned. I mean, I'm not in any way, never really been an observant Jew, but I question. That's what we talked about yesterday in the program. By the way, I do urge people, if they want to check it out, yesterday's Halitics with Arlen. Do we have to reconsider what Judaism even means, and whether it's viable at this point, given how closely so many Jewish leaders, and the reason I say that, Kirsten, I don't think you're Jewish, maybe you are, I don't believe it, how closely Jewish leaders have insisted that the religion is tied to the state of Israel. So if it's tied to the Jewish genocidal state, I don't know how it can be a viable religion. People said to me, well, what about, is Christianity condemned because of Nazism? I would say, well, the Nazis didn't tie their ideology to the Catholic Church or the Christian Church, and those churches didn't say we're tied to Nazism. I got plenty of problems with Catholicism and Christianity. I'm not defending them. I'm just saying it seems to me this religion, my religion, has tied itself to a country that is committing the ultimate crime. So I don't know how that can sustain itself under those circumstances.
I think a lot of folks are asking the same questions, especially younger folks, fortunately. And there are beautiful examples like Jewish Voice for Peace, organizations that have taken a very powerful stance against the genocide. So there's obviously a way to do it. But I, like you, have been disappointed in how mainstream, otherwise progressive Jews have not taken a strong enough stand.
Yeah, there's really no other way to look at it. All right, so glad to have Kirsten stay with us. Don't forget, do click like, do click subscribe. Kirsten, some of her recent work she's written, she's published a ton of stuff. I've read some of it. I can't say I've read all of it, but I've read a lot. There's just a lot to get to. It's really, really good stuff. The reason, we'll talk a little bit about climate reparations going down there. The links, some of the links are in the description of the program, so you definitely want to check out Kirsten's work. We're going to focus, though, to start the program on what I do, and I think maybe we have a slightly different take. I kind of do see some positivity in Bill McKibben's latest, Here Comes the Sun. You're a little, how would you characterize your reaction to McKibben's latest? Let me see if I can get that up for everybody.
So Here Comes the Sun, as the name suggests, is a very optimistic treatment of the power of renewable energy, especially solar energy, to get us out of our climate predicament. So, I agree with you and Bill McKibben that there is promise in solar power. We need to get away from fossil fuels. We need to find ways of securing power that do not depend on fossil fuels. So Bill McKibben is you'd say he's of the eco-modernist camp. So the eco-modernists, they are characterized by extreme technological optimism. So pretty much any problem we have can be solved with technology, even though most of the problems we're looking at are themselves caused by excess consumption, excess technology. Again, this boom of technological expansion propelled by fossil fuels. So, our entire society is built on cheap energy, as Bill McKibben knows and talks about. This explosion of fossil fuels that we've had for the past 200 years have powered everything, from the cars we drive to the food we eat. I had a kiwi this morning that got to me through diesel transport, probably from California. I'm here in Maryland. the devices that we're communicating on right now, all of it is founded on cheap energy. So it's this historically this blip of cheap fuel for the past 200 years that made everything different since fossil fuels were discovered, and will make everything different as fossil fuels peter out. And so the hope of eco-modernists like Bill McKibben is that we can simply transfer this entire modern techno-industrial civilization, everything, the status quo that we know and love, right? The consumption patterns of us here in the wealthy parts of the world. We can just take all that and transfer it over to another energy source, in this case, solar and wind. So one thing you don't hear, and I just want to make this note right at the beginning, we are going to talk mostly about renewable energy. When you hear eco-modernists like McKibben talk about the environmental crisis, what they mean is climate change, is the climate crisis. They're not talking about biodiversity collapse. We're looking at the sixth grade extinction. More than 1 million species are facing extinction. That's, everything from charismatic megafauna to like tigers, like elephants, to the pollinators that we rely on to eat.
Right, lots of little insects, and you mentioned were many species on the brink. I think we did lose is it the northern white rhino in Africa, the last one? It was a male specimen. He's gone. I guess they hope that they can take the DNA and somehow recreate the animal, but of course it's not going to be the same. So we are seeing many of these animals already disappeared, and perhaps I always wonder, just to interrupt you for a moment, because we've seen extinctions of these giant megafauna since humans have been kind of populating the earth, even before the industrial age. I always wondered, do you have any thoughts on whether the giant sloth and all those animals that we had in North America that were that disappeared after or during the last ice age and its aftermath, is that because of hunting by indigenous peoples or people who migrated to the North American continent from Asia?
I think in most cases it is attributed to humans. We were talking a little bit earlier about pessimism and how much of our work is just really pessimistic, and we're going to try to get away from that a little bit. But the dark truth is that humans do seem to use what resources are available. We don't impose limits on ourselves until we have to, until something's gone, right? So until the oil is gone, we're going to use up every last drop. Until the white rhinos are gone, we're going to capture them all and put them in zoos. We're going to hunt them for their tusks. That does seem to be a feature of our species. The thing about, prehistoric people, hunter-gatherers, pre-agricultural people, is that populations were so low. Those people were moving around in bands. They were, migratory. So when they used up the resources, the food, the things they needed to exploit in one area, they would just move to another area. And their populations were so low, their birth rates were so low that there wasn't really a problem. With 8 billion people and growing, we are at planetary limits where we can't just move to another place and use the resources there.
And McKibben does not address that, correct? He does not, and I haven't read the book. I guess I should have. I don't know if you've read the whole book, but it seems as though, and when you're talking about this idea of these eco-modernists, he and Ezra Klein, about whom we talked much last time you were on, share a lot in common, although Klein never really talks about the climate crisis. I think it's because he is hopeful, or denial, but perhaps hopeful, that people like McKibben are on the right track and that we'll just all use our computers and AI and figure it all out in the end.
Right. Yeah, there's no discussion of limits in the eco-modernist playbook. It's all about we can solve everything through technology. So there's no, of course, there's biodiversity crisis is completely ignored. Things like microplastics showing up in all our water supplies, forever chemicals, which are endocrine disrupting and cancer causing and wreak havoc on amphibians and fish populations. We don't talk about that. We talk about the climate crisis because that's the one crisis that that we can say there's a solution. And the solution is in scare quotes because climate crisis is a predicament. So problems have solutions, predicaments don't. And the thing about a predicament or a wicked problem, as we also refer to them as, is that all your solutions generate problems of their own. So just to break it down a little bit. So let's talk about what Bill McKibben talks about in Here Comes the Sun. He'll say things like 95% of new energy generation over the past year has been renewable energy, solar panels and wind primarily. So he says we can build 30 million acres of solar panels and provide 100% of US energy. And he says energy there. He says over the past 10 years, the share of renewable electricity is up 10% globally, while the share of electricity produced by fossil fuels is down 8%. So there are two words in there that I want to kind of parse out, energy and electricity. When you hear eco-modernists talk about the renewable energy revolution, what they're really talking about is electricity. So electricity is only 20% of the global energy demand. The other 80% of global energy demand is for non-electricity things like shipping.
Right. Let me just jump in because I understand transportation is still the number one sector in terms of consumption of energy and fossil fuels. So it's actually the container ships, those filthy diesel ships that sail, churn up the oceans and also kill marine aquatic life, and the planes that go north-south, right, that carry your kiwi from, I guess, from New Zealand or wherever they grew it, or maybe it was on a ship, I don't know. But a lot of times the fresh fruits coming from Peru, for example, they fly them because it takes too long and berries will go bad in the hold of a ship. Yeah. So that's where we're burning all these fuels. And you're saying, and I don't know this, tell me, we're still burning just as much or more than ever. We
are. So the interesting thing is there has never been an energy transition in the history of the world. So wood to coal, we transitioned wood to coal. No, we added coal. So we're burning more wood than ever for fuel, just because there's more people. So there's people who don't have access to fossil fuels. They're still burning wood. It's not a transition, it's an addition. So
just let me interrupt there again, because McKibben does talk in this interview about how transitioning to solar is really good for poor people. He mentions Africa, where I understand wood is a primary fuel source for millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people in Africa. So wouldn't this be sort of a transition if people can start just plugging solar panels into their roof and
sure.
cooking with it?
Yeah, there's definitely a place for it. And there are hopeful stories like people in Afghanistan sort of scavenging parts and making solar cookers. There's certainly some little hopeful nuggets in there. And I don't want to throw cold water on all of them. But I do want to just note that, again, electricity is this tiny fraction of the total energy that's used. And as long as our population and our economy, our global economy, keep growing, we won't be transitioning, we'll be adding. So sure, we may have, the share of renewable electricity or the new new electricity production has been renewables, but almost all of the gains in, the reduced emissions that we've achieved through renewable development over the past 30 or so years have been canceled out by economic and population growth. And this is not according to some leftist blog I've been reading. This is according to the IPCC. So as long as we keep growing our population and our economy, it's going to be additive. We're going to keep on using fossil fuels until there are none left to use, and we can talk about how we are running out. We're going to keep on using those fossil fuels, and we're going to be adding solar and wind, which have their own demands on fossil fuels.
You know what? I hear that about like peak oil and stuff that we're running out, but it doesn't seem like it because the price of fossil fuels is remarkably low. It's way too low, and we're consuming as much or more than ever. So how could we be running out if the price stays way too affordable?
Well, of course, through subsidies, right? And the campaign finance reform, I guess, is needed as the reform that makes other reforms possible, as all lefties know. But it's affordable because of subsidies. It's affordable because our leaders know that that's how they get their next campaign paid for. And I know that you talk a lot about carbon taxes, which certainly have their place in correcting and internalizing those environmental externalities of continued fossil fuel production. So, and sure enough, a lot of McKibben's optimism and the eco-modernist optimism is based on market fundamentalism. So the free market will do its magic, and the price of solar will keep coming down, which will displace fossil fuels. The tricky thing there is that the more you the more you use solar, the more you turn away from fossil fuels, the cheaper the fossil fuels get. So unless you have that tax infrastructure in place, fossil fuels will increase as well, along with the renewables. So
right, it's a vicious circle because the less you consume, the cheaper the price, and then the more you'll start consuming. So that isn't the solution. That's why I've always promoted those taxes, although people don't like them, and you may feel similarly to this objection. Well, it's still using the market, right? We're still using a market mechanism, and we need to move away from the market altogether. I'm not a market. I'm not an opponent of the market. I think the markets are essential because they send the signals to producers and consumers what's available and what to produce. But I think we need to step in and have much greater control over the markets and take power from, obviously the big corporations that now control them.
Right. Absolutely. And I, my heart is not in the markets. Fundamentally, I think much bigger things need to change. I think that, market instruments like carbon taxation could be an important step along the way. The interesting thing about Bill McKibben is that earlier, we can call it early Bill, he was talking about, he was really mounting challenges to the growth-oriented, market-directed, endless consumption, endless growth status quo. He was saying, no, we need to, bioregionalize. We need to, move more towards growing our own food, towards like rejecting corporate control of our economic systems, which drive this orientation towards endless economic growth, which of course benefits only the few at the top, right? We hear a lot, we need economic growth to uplift those in poverty. In fact, the vast majority of global economic growth has benefited the top 10%. The bottom...
Right, the champions of growth just want to be able to give just a little tiny trickle of additional life quality to people, just so they can say, hey, we made life better for you because now you get a few extra, bowls of rice every week than you had before. But meanwhile, they're collecting virtually the entirety of the, whatever you want to call it, the increased wealth that's been generated from exploiting our resources. I was thinking of something you said, Kirsten, about how McKibben seems to have changed a little bit and become more of a market believer or a free marketer. Let's put it that way, because I like markets too, but I don't believe in, quote, free, meaning people don't have control over them. I've noticed that, and I have a theory about that. I think he became a Democratic insider. I think he had previously seen himself as somebody who was just a truth teller, wrote for the New Yorker, a scientist, like you're a scientist, and you tell, the evidence takes you where it takes you. when he became more of an activist, he said, where are my friends in the activist community, the Sierra Club, big institutional environmental groups, Democratic politicians who will entertain me, who will talk to me, and I'm going to, sort of move my message to meet what they want me to say, what they're comfortable with. I wonder if you're seeing that, and then I'm going to use that to make an argument where we can maybe disagree a little bit.
Okay. No, that's very interesting. And I remember we talked about this with our discussion of the abundance agenda. And those guys, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, were clearly angling for a position in the Harris administration. Like, this is the way we rise up out of Democratic, big D Democratic Party, malaise, as we embrace this abundance agenda. We can have it all. We can have affordable housing if we just make it all clean, green, and renewable. And that's very interesting. You're saying something similar about McKibben. If I might just, I'd love to hear your question, your further point, but just to interject in the meantime, what I've heard about McKibben's transformation and what he said is that he sees the green transition as sort of a way in to the, like, we need, I hope he still believes we need contraction. We need a sharp turn away from our growth-oriented, consumption-oriented engine driving industrial civilization. But the way to get there is through, if we decarbonize, if we go to green technology, that's a way in. Once we do that, we can start thinking about contraction. But he also says, and this is a fair point, we don't have, it's not entirely a fair point, but I can understand where he's coming from. We don't have time. We don't have time to talk about values and talk about changing the lodestar of our society from economic growth to something else, to something more communitarian, something more community-oriented and sustainable.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That his argument is actually completely wrong. We don't have time not to do it immediately. That's how I would respond to that. Yeah, we understand it takes time to transition. That's why we have to start right now, as quickly as possible, as forcibly as possible. And I think the only way to do it is what you've said, what you've argued. And by the way, please check out Kirsten's work in the description, the links. But what you've argued, hey, we've got to make sure everyone has enough. I mean, that's what climate reparations is all about. The North, whatever you want to call it, the North countries or the capitalists, whatever, imperialist nations have taken so many resources from the global South. They're impoverished. They have nothing. We have to replenish their ability to take care of themselves, but at the same time reduce greatly our consumption. Basically, making sure that everyone can live, has enough, but we aren't over-consuming.
Yes. Absolutely.
And I think that's what you're saying in reparations. But are we already over-consuming? Like, let's say we just completely redistributed wealth from the North to the South. So basically, it was pretty equitable. I mean, I'm not going to say it's going to be completely, we can never have perfect equity, but relatively reasonably equitable. Would we still be over-consuming?
That's the thing. So overshoot is overshoot. We're in something like 80% overshoot. So overshoot is a really important word that I wish would enter the mainstream. Like, as I was saying, the entire ecological crisis has been collapsed into climate change. Climate change is the buzzword. And to your point, you mentioned earlier, no one's even talking about climate change anymore because things, we have even
well, and let me just say, again, interjecting, I'm sorry to do that to you, but
that's great.
The Democrats weren't. It's not like it's just we have Trump and Trump pretends or denies it's happening. And I want to get into that in a little bit, but Harris never talked about it. The only thing she said was, we can frack and still have, I think her justification for flipping on fracking was, I've been convinced that we can frack and still have a growing economy, which was completely the most absurd answer. It has nothing. No, you don't not frack till you can have a growing economy. You don't frack because it's bad for the planet, period.
Right. Yeah, it's extraordinary. Yeah, we don't, we don't hear about climate change. We don't hear about any of it. So And like I said, yeah, the abundance agenda is a way for the Democrats to gain some kind of relevance again, but it's the wrong track. So my article on climate reparations actually, it's sort of a good segue into talking about what renewable energy really is, right? So you mentioned colonialism. So climate reparations are sort of a way to correct for centuries of colonialism, colonial extraction, where the North, the global North, has benefited from the resources. And I hate that word again, because it's like resources. These are things for us to use. They're not there for us to use. They're the biophysical basis of our own existence. From wood to fossil fuels to trace metals that are used in renewable energy. We've been extracting those through colonialism, globalization, and climate reparations are a way to try to correct some of that injustice. My argument in that article, of course, is that that's not enough. As long as we have economic growth and, of course, accompanying population growth as the guiding principle of our civilization, that's never questioned by people like Bill McKibben, except in his earlier works, as we were saying, but you seldom hear them publicly questioned. As long as those are our guiding principles, there is no way to correct for centuries of colonial extraction. And in fact, the renewable energy transition is poised to pump colonial extraction into overdrive. So another thing we don't hear about in Here Comes the Sun is where does all this stuff come from? This renewable energy. What is it? Solar panels, wind turbines. What are they made out of? Well, there's a lot of trace metals. Cobalt is used in the manufacture of pretty much all lithium-ion batteries, rechargeable batteries. Those are in electric vehicles. Maybe some of you drive an electric vehicle. 70% of cobalt is produced under absolutely brutal conditions in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Slave labor, uttered, just completely leveling habitats, poisoning the water supplies, displacing indigenous people, except for those that remain to labor in the cobalt mines, a lot of whom are children. That's just one element. There's other things. Lithium, neodymium and dysprosium, are essential for wind turbines and electric vehicles. They're overwhelmingly come from an open pit mine near a Chinese city in Inner Mongolia. That area was once covered with farms growing, watermelons and eggplants. Now those farms are abandoned. People have fled. The few who remain have all kinds of diseases. The lake that's left there is filled with 2,000 tons of toxic waste, sulfates, and ammonia that are used to purify these metals, refine these metals for use in your EVs and wind turbines, is left behind in a toxic lake where all the life is gone. So these are just a few of the elements that are used to build this renewable energy infrastructure. A big one is copper. So copper has very high electrical conductivity. It's used in pretty much everything electrical. We're going to need vast quantities of it to power the renewable energy revolution. So copper, we've used so much of it. In 1900, we could find copper ore that was about 5% copper. So, when you mine, you scrape up a whole bunch of ore, like all the earth. You might scrape up a whole mountain, and then you have to refine it to get the trace metals out of there. Copper used to be 5%. Now it's 0.6% of that ore on average. Occasionally we can find some that's like 1%, rarely. Usually
they cherry picked all the denser earth, and the earth that was dense with copper is all gone. So we're just scraping through it, like going through the oceans to get the last few tuna left, or I understand that they're smaller and smaller. The salmon in the Pacific Northwest now, they're much smaller than they used to be because we've taken all the giant ones out. And also the oceans can't sustain. There just isn't enough nutrients in the oceans as there used to be to sustain these fish, and we're seeing exactly the same process with the minerals in the earth. So again, we were hoping to be a little bit more positive and optimistic. Well, what do we do then? I mean, because I can hear people saying, I even say it myself, oh my God, look at these two like crunchy, chewy people. What are they they don't know what it's like. We're just barely surviving. Now they want to make our gasoline even more expensive, and I can't afford a electric car anyway, and they're telling me the electric car isn't any good, and can't be true. It's all a hoax.
Right. Well, so let's go back. So our subject today is Bill McKibben. Let's go back to early Bill. What was the idea there? The idea, Bill McKibben was writing back in the early 2000s more about how we need to move beyond economic growth. So we need to go back to bioregionalism, to growing food in communities, to maybe I don't need that kiwi from New Zealand. Maybe I need tomatoes that I grew in my front yard. Maybe the apples that grow right here in Maryland are just fine. Maybe we need to move to, so redistribution. So going back to the idea of overshoot, redistribution is not going, by itself, is not going to solve overshoot. But we would do well to remember that economic growth is benefiting those at the top. No working person or no person in the 99% should be cheering on economic growth because it doesn't benefit us. It benefits.
Well, I always want to jump in for a second because I do think redistribution, you're right, it doesn't solve overshoot. And certainly if we all are consuming, if on average we're consuming more, but everyone has, the people at the bottom have more and the people at the top have less, we're still overshooting. It's still a problem. But I think it does address it. And here's why I say that. A huge part, I believe, of our overconsumption is, for want of a better expression, keeping up with or trying to stay ahead of the Joneses. We're all competing to have, at least the billionaires to have the most houses. I read this study. I don't know if I talked to you about this, Kirsten. I was a study, but that the richest people in Manhattan, one of the ways they compete with each other, the billionaires, the masters of Wall Street, whatever they call themselves, they compete with each other to see who can have bigger families. Like it's a big status symbol to have 7 or 8 kids because New York is so friggin' expensive that if you can have 7 kids and they all go to like Dalton and, we have the house in the Hamptons as well, our 10-bedroom mansion. So that's obviously the worst possible thing because it's not only this generation's consuming more and more, but now you're creating more and more carbon eaters, carbon consumers down the line, and they're going to consume the most carbon because they're the richest people. So if we all had a lot less, probably there would be, on balance, we would be able to reduce overshoot as well.
I definitely am not going to argue with you on the point that overconsumption by the rich is a vast amount of our problem. A redistribution is absolutely necessary. There are nuanced, different things in there like the growth of the global middle class. So the global middle class, and this is surprising to a lot of people, usually think there's like the 10% or the 1% at the top and then everybody else is poor. Well, by 2030, the global middle class will be 5 billion people. And those are people like you and me or probably globally a little, lower socioeconomically than you and me living in Maryland. But these are folks who eat processed foods. A lot of them eat meat, not me, but they use gadgets, they drive cars, they buy, clothes. So this is the global middle class. And this is really, so folks use this argument about overconsumption of the wealthy to argue against the argument that our population is a problem, right? So, and increasingly over the past 20 years or so, sort of rooted in the 20, 30 years, sometime around the mid-90s, the idea of overpopulation started to be demonized as being misogynistic, as being eco-fascist is a word that you'll hear. And that's really an argument that doesn't bear weight, because what we find is that pretty much everywhere across the world, any country you look at, with a few exceptions caused by religion, where women get the opportunity to plan their own families, that is to say, enough education and enough employment opportunity and enough access to safe abortion and contraception, birth rates decline. In fact, pretty much everywhere where women do have those opportunities, they decline below replacement. So left to their own devices, women would be producing a shrinking population. And this is the trend in most of the industrialized world. Most of the population growth is still occurring in sub-Saharan Africa, where women and girls don't have those opportunities. There's child marriage. There's not access to abortion, contraception. There's domestic violence if women do try to exercise their own reproductive choice. So in terms of anything positive, something that I cling to on bad days is just this very fact that that anywhere women get the chance, we choose not to have kids, or we choose small families, we choose below replacement fertility. And that is, a gradually contracting population is key to creating a livable future, because our population has to be smaller, and we'd rather have it be by design rather than disaster.
I was thinking a lot about all the different things you were saying. As I understand it, Israel certainly is trying to grow its population, so they send their settlers out at people who are trying to colonize and take more for themselves. They need bigger, more kids that share their whatever ideology they hope when they grow up. But even in this country, like I've noticed the MAGA people and the talk we have to the population, the replacement theory. The people that I know, even who are more conservative, they're not, as far as I can tell, with few exceptions, the religious, right? If they're devout Mormons, maybe they're devout, really, really Orthodox Jews, right. They'll have bigger families. But most people, even if they're conservative, they have 2 kids. They're not having 8 kids. Exactly. We just don't see it. It just doesn't make sense in today's world for a family, for individuals to do that. That is a positive.
That's very positive. Yeah, to your point, it's more of an ideology than like something anyone actually wants to do. With a few exceptions, like the Collinses, Malcolm and Simone Collins are sort of the figureheads of the pro-natalist movement. Elon Musk is another one. In one of his ketamine-fueled fantasies, everybody is fathering however many kids, 13, 14 kids. Like he has. So, and to your point about Israel, yes, that is when I said with few exceptions, fertility rates are below replacement in the industrialized world. Israel is one of, in fact, the only exception that I can think of. And that's, again, because of religious dogma. People are literally brainwashed into thinking of reproduction. And this is the key to pronatalism. Reproduction is a tool for external political or economic ends. And in this case, it's a tool for winning the demographic war against Palestine.
Against the Arab world as general is how they often would phrase it, although really it's the Palestinian people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, it's also sad. It's also depressing. All right. So just one more point, though, I wanted to, because I understood exactly what you're saying about the middle class. You have more middle class people who consume more. They want their fresh vegetables, strawberries, which don't grow natively in most areas, but they taste good. So we'll get. I understand that, but I think I want to get back to that for one more moment, because I think if you reduce inequality, if you greatly reduce it, if you compress people, even if you compress them not as poor, but as sort of middle class, let's just say that, where you have a little bit set aside, you have more than you absolutely need to live, you have a comfort level, you have a cushion. If everyone around you is living a relatively, I won't say Spartan, but they're not eating fancy meals, they're not going, then I think people are more comfortable with that as well. I think there's a lot of sense of, well, how come they get it and I don't? But if everyone's kind of in the same boat, probably people won't feel they have to consume as much as they can. Maybe I'm wrong about that. That's sort of an idea I have.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Does that
make sense to you? Let me just, is that even clear? I don't know, maybe I'm not being clear in what I'm trying to say, but I think when you understand what I'm saying, I think.
I think you're saying that if, and this is a really great point, if the sort of the standards around you are all sort of a comfortable, reasonable standard of existence, then the keeping up with the Joneses aspect is minimized, and we can all be happier with just with necessities rather than
we'll be satisfied with enough.
Yes, right.
Rather than trying to have, I maybe I'm wrong, but I just, because
Right.
envy and greed are the sins that we all have.
Absolutely.
But if you're not envying your neighbor's latest possession because they don't have one, then maybe you won't want one either.
Right. And you know, it's a great point and a great train of thought. And, you know, absolutely everyone deserves that comfortable existence. I won't say comfortable middle class existence, because there are a lot of aspects of our middle class existence, at least right here, that are excessive. Like I don't really need a phone and a laptop. Like I'd survive just fine if I had my basics covered. You know, my community, my dogs, my family, a comfortable place to live, some greenery to sustain my spirit, and a place to go for walks, places to go play music with friends. I do just fine with those things. So I think we sort of get normalized, like everyone deserves a comfortable middle class existence. Do I really need to drive a internal combustion engine that's like a little box that I use to get me from point A to point B, which I could actually do quite easily by walking or biking? So, you know, I think it's worth questioning, like, what is that existence that everyone deserves? And we don't want to, you know, obviously there are a lot of people in the world who don't have those basic needs covered, and we, you know, we hear those folks invoked a lot in the name of economic growth, even though we now know, because we talked about it, that economic growth is not lifting those folks up. You know, the fact is, and this is in going back to the more pessimistic part of things, that if we really redistributed wealth, a lot of the wealth of the very wealthy is just hoarded. It's just sitting. It's just wealth that's hoarded, right? If we really redistributed it, then we might actually see a burst in energy consumption, because the very poorest people can suddenly heat their homes and eat enough. So, but that sort of, that points to something that we've talked about before, which is, you know, how do you hold in how do you constrain the consumption levels at the very top to make it possible for everyone to achieve a comfortable standard? Progressive taxation, obviously, there should not be billionaires. There should be
Right.
You know, levels of taxation that allow everyone to just have a normal.
Well, I was nodding to what you were saying about if we redistribute wealth, there could well be a surge in consumption, because the poorest are barely consuming enough to survive, and some aren't consuming enough to survive. So that is true. You're spot on there, and I guess we have to deal with that, and that also goes along with, yes, reducing greatly consumption by the wealthy. Also, what you're talking about, family planning, just because we are at a point, right? The Earth's population of humans is beyond the Earth's carrying capacity for everyone to have an okay life.
Yes.
To have enough. Who's on the planet now would require us to consume more resources than the Earth can generate, I believe. Is that correct? Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Well, again, this is the concept of overshoot, which I wish was more in mainstream. I think I started to explain this here, and then I got sidetracked because the discussions with you are always so interesting. But overshoot is the concept that we are consuming more than there is to consume. We are consuming the biophysical basis of our existence. We are consuming the forests. We are consuming the water supplies. We are producing more waste than can be absorbed. Because if we had a much smaller population, you know, many conservationists and people with expertise have converged around the idea of a sustainable population as 3 billion people living at a comfortable middle-class standard of living, roughly like a middle-class person in Mexico would live. So basic needs covered, good diet, enough nutrition, some transportation, home heating, a place to live. All those things are taken care of. The Earth has enough to support 3 billion of us. Now, that also means that the Earth has enough to support all the other species. So there are no longer 1 million species facing extinction. And this is something that the Bill McKibbens of the world don't talk about, is that this abundance agenda, this green energy revolution doesn't make space for the rest of the web of life to survive, to thrive, to
which also, if we don't preserve that web of life and even strengthen it from where it is now, which is with big rents in it, then we're pulling our own house down too. We're just going to, at some point, we'll run out of the resources that we require. If you consistently spend more money than you have than your bank accounts generate and your income, you'll go bankrupt. And that's exactly what you're talking about in terms of overshoot, to use that.
Right. And how do we, so the question is, so how do we even manage this? How do we use more than there is? Well, we do it through debt. So debt is a claim on future resources. I don't know how many trillion, maybe trillions of dollars of global debt. That all means like future energy consumption, which we don't have. We were just talking about how, fossil fuels are petering down. Renewables are not enough to replace them. So by the way, fossil fuels are incredibly energy dense. Like, it's the densest form of energy you can have. It's easy to transport. It's the easiest form of energy that we have. And nuclear renewables, they're not, you don't get as much bang for the buck. So you need much more infrastructure. You need much more energy generated into producing energy invested into producing energy. Then you get.
Let me interrupt you with a question, because this is something I've always thought was the case. Exactly what you're saying right now, that there's so many calories in a gallon of gasoline that no other energy can compete in terms of efficiency, in terms of cheapness. But McKibben says, am I reading him wrong, that now solar is actually cheaper? So I don't understand that. How could solar be cheaper if you can burn that gasoline and get that explosion that generates so much energy? How could solar be cheaper?
I imagine for some applications. So again, you can't use solar to generate to do all things. You can use solar to generate enough electricity to power my house. So I think in some applications like rooftop solar, of course, is much more rooftop solar. If I have solar panels on my house, I'm using that solar energy right here to power my light bulbs. If I have an array of solar panels in the desert in Nevada, not only is that obliterating habitat for the desert tortoise, it also has to be transmitted through power lines to get to population centers. So I think, it's sort of selective cherry picking of the facts when folks like McKibben say things like this. And again, it's the cheaper it gets, the more we'll abandon the coal and the oil. The cheaper those will get, and then once again we're back to coal and oil. So it doesn't work out in the long term. And also, we're at a point still where the components of solar, the cobalt, the lithium are
rare earth metals, right? Rare earth minerals.
Exactly. Where those things are relatively easy to get, but what you'll never hear McKibben and other eco-monarchists talk about is how, at what cost we get those things. So lithium ion batteries in your EV. We're going to need, I think I read somewhere, we're going to need 160,000 years of mining lithium to power a complete conversion to electric vehicles. Obviously, we don't have that kind of time. So lithium comes from places like the Thacker Pass mine in Nevada, which is sacred to folks living in the Fort McDermott Indian Reservation nearby. That Thacker Pass is now, it was held up by lawsuits from environmental groups and from the native people on that reservation. It's going forward, it's moving forward. That is going to be at enormous cost to the local ecosystem. These are sacred lands. Lithium mining demands enormous water. mining these metals, especially as they get more rare, which of course they will with the renewable energy boom. It requires diesel-powered vehicles, so diesel-powered machinery. How do you mine? Well, you use these enormous machinery. You use trucks to mine it out of there. The renewable energy transition itself is going to drive such an upsurge in fossil fuel production on top of just our business as usual, what we're using already, just for transportation and building, energy use, turning on our lights.
Yeah, no, it's daunting, and it doesn't augur well, even if we are able to transition the way McKibben describes in his, I guess, optimistic dream world. Let me focus on you on a couple of other thoughts I just had. One, I did want to get to this issue of alternatives to the Democratic Party. We discussed this a little bit before the program, and I brought up that I believe McKibben has been somewhat captured by the Democratic Party, and that explains, from my perspective, why he has moved somewhat to the right and become more of a market fundamentalist. You are I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm just trying to understand your position. My sense is you're less sanguine about the potential of the Green Party, and we also have now the working class party. Now, there's the Working Families Party, which is basically an arm of the Democratic Party, but there's also in Maryland now the Working Class Party. I'm looking into, can't find much information about. What's your thoughts on them as being I don't want to use the word savior, but maybe a home for people who are just fed up with both parties?
Well, maybe you can give us some perspective on how successful third parties have been at smaller local offices. So I think there's certainly, you have to start somewhere. And I think city councils, school board positions, maybe state legislatures. That the voice of the Green Party is obviously, the Green Party platform is completely in line with everything we've been talking about. Is completely needed in the national political discourse, but I don't see it getting there. I don't see it because we don't. So every time the Green Party runs a presidential candidate, I have to say, and I'm sorry, Hal, I groan a little, because what's going to happen? Well, they're just going to be blamed as spoilers, and we all know. Anyone who's looked at it at all knows that. There was a song, a Green Party friend of mine taught, it's all because I voted for Ralph Nader. Like everything bad that's happened since then is
that is true. Ralph Nader was a huge problem, but my argument with Nader is it's a bad analogy, because I think Al Gore would have been a better president than Ralph Nader. I voted for Gore. I was very upset with Nader because I didn't think he would have been a particularly good president for a lot of reasons, and Al Gore. His record after the fact suggests he really would have been a good president. He certainly took the climate crisis seriously.
Right.
He talked about protecting Social Security. I believed him. So I think you have to vote for the best candidate. But the Democrat Party since 2000 has gotten worse and worse.
Yes. Well, and even there.
And I know you and I just. I thought maybe I'm wrong about this. Did you vote for? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I thought you also were very disenchanted with Kamala. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
I was. I wrote in Bernie, and whatever you want to think about me because of that, I'm protected because the Electoral College means that my vote didn't mean a darn thing. So don't get
I voted for Jill Stein, so I'm not judging you. I'm just surprised because what you said about being a spoiler struck me as meaning you would have voted for Harris. And no. I think you can only be a spoiler candidate if one of the candidates is good.
Right.
And you spoiled the chances of a good candidate, and I just didn't see that. I thought Al Gore probably would have been a good president, or decent anyway.
That's very possible. I mean, in that case, like, people love to. The Democratic Party refuses to introspect. They never have. Not this time, not in 2016, and certainly not in 2000. Refuses to look at itself and see what it did wrong. And there were so many things that it could have done better than. chosen a more progressive, Gore could have chosen a more progressive running mate. The Supreme Court decided that case the wrong way. There were hanging chads in Florida. There were, what was this really fascinating statistic? More Democrats in Florida voted for Bush than voted for Nader. So I hear what you're saying about Al Gore. He certainly has been better on climate. He wasn't, I don't think he's great on campaign finance reform, on international, on the military-industrial complex. And in any case, so many people were disenchanted with him that they Democrats voted for Bush rather than Nader. So, but rather than focus on these things, on introspecting and what could we have done, what could we do differently? How can we appeal to more voters? It's easier for the Democrats to blame the third party. And that's my concern with the Greens, is that will always be the favorite thing of the Democratic Party to do, is blame the Greens for pretty much everything. And we hear, we hear Harris blaming, blaming voters, certainly long before she considers that her support of the genocide, may have been catastrophic to her performance in that election. So my argument with the Greens is, fantastic to get that platform out there, run your local candidates, absolutely have those discussions. Running a national candidate seems to be a waste of time before you've built the infrastructure that allows you to run those candidates without being accused of being a spoiler, right? So do everything you can to get instant runoff voting, to allow people to choose their favorite candidate rather than choosing the lesser of two evils, which people will always, I think this about me. I spent every day in the 2016 election, and to a lesser extent in 2020, making phone calls for Bernie Sanders in the primary. And I heard it so many times, people, I love his platform, but he could never win. So I'm going to vote for Clinton in the primary, even though the primary is the important election, right? That's where you get to choose.
It also was false, because it was clear that Bernie was the strongest Democrat in both 2016 and probably 2020. I think there's an argument there. Maybe Biden had more appeal. I don't know. But there's no question Clinton was not a popular candidate by any means. And Bernie almost certainly would have won that election against Trump.
Right. And you and I know that because we've spent a lot of time, reading up on it, right?
The polls at the time showed that. I would point those polls out to Clinton, because I was doing a lot of blogging and post and writing at that time, which I've sort of stopped doing except for this. And I would show those polls. I would like people to say, "Oh, well, Clinton can't, Bernie can't win. Clinton, and I would put the polls right. Oh, that doesn't prove anything. And then I would say, okay, well, then what's your evidence? Because you're saying Hillary's going to win. And I've just showed you several different polls that all show that Bernie does better in a general election against Trump than Hillary. You say that doesn't prove anything? Well, what's the basis for your conclusion that Hillary would win? Oh, well, people don't like socialists. People wait till they go after Bernie.
Right.
So that's not evidence. That's just your speculation. People know what Bernie stands for.
Right. And the speculation comes from somewhere, though, right? I mean, most people are still consumers of TV media. And it just points to the power of corporate media, because those, I remember, you're absolutely right. I remember seeing those polls, and they were on ABC, CBS, CNN. But the narrative that went along with them was, well, do you think a Democratic Socialist could ever win? And then reinforcing again and again that idea that you heard from voters, no, a Democratic Socialist could never win, even though he's the most popular candidate in America. Universal health care is overwhelmingly popular. Environmental protections are overwhelmingly popular. Making corporations and the wealthy pay fair taxes is overwhelmingly popular. And still, we hear from voter after voter, when I spoke to people and when you speak to people, Bernie can't win. And why is that? Well, it's the power of the messaging that we hear. It's our own Hasbara, it's our own just it's corporate owned media.
Yeah, you give some of those people I was arguing with a little more credit than I do. I think they just didn't want to believe Bernie could win. I think they themselves were somewhat privileged people. I think they were, a lot of them, motivated by, and maybe, I don't know how you'll respond to this, but I think some of them were women, and they really, really, it was important to them. Okay. I have no idea why. Please explain this to me. It was so important. They wanted so badly for there to be a woman president. I so don't get that. I couldn't care less if there's a Jewish president. I'm Jewish. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. This idea that somehow if the person goes to the bathroom the way you do, they'll be better for you seems not completely absurd, but in that specific instance, absurd. Somebody whose record so clearly showed she wasn't pro-woman. She wasn't. Her values weren't those of the nurturing sex. They weren't those of the caring, gentler. To the extent these stereotypes about women are accurate, fine. She wasn't that person. So I just couldn't understand that. Maybe you can explain that.
It raises the really interesting discussion, and this is something we could talk about for another hour, of identity politics. So my understanding, and maybe you can add nuance to this, is that identity politics have been around for a long time, like you say, they were certainly operative in 2016, but more than ever, even more, the aftermath of the 2016 election jump-started the extent to which the Democratic Party has become the party of identity politics. So identity politics became a way to explain Clinton's loss. So it wasn't about policies that didn't speak to the working class, because the Democrats were really just sort of light pro-choice Republicans as far as class issues. The Democrats weren't really going to, uplift people of color, working class minorities, because their policies certainly hadn't. The minimum wage has been stuck at $7.25 for how long, under Democratic and Republican administrations, which overwhelmingly impacts, because of institutional racism, which overwhelmingly impacts minority populations. And yet, you found those populations, especially older folks, voting for Clinton, voting straight down the line Democrat. But the explanation in the aftermath became that people wouldn't vote for Clinton because she was a woman, that people wouldn't vote for, so that became sort of a way to explain just the collapse of the Democrats having any chance whatsoever. Whereas actually the class issues are much more important. And we don't hear about class issues anymore. They've been so marginalized, like the DSA and the Green Party are the only people talking about it. And where do we hear about, we don't hear about the Greens in our mainstream media. We don't hear about DSA. Those are just the sort of fringes where we still get to talk about class issues, and the fact that neither the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party is working for the vast majority.
Yeah, I think they're both regressive. They're both making things worse. It's just a matter of how fast and in what areas are they making things worse. But your point about identity politics is excellent also, because the failure of the Democratic Party to embrace redistributive policies is we've seen has led to many voters of color becoming Trump supporters, which really actually doesn't surprise me because he would talk about working class issues sometimes to a degree that you didn't hear from Democrats. The tariffs are a perfect example. You can argue they're terrible, whatever. I believe tariffs are important, but not the way he implements them. But he did talk about those issues. He talked about war and peace, especially in 2016, about how bad war was for workers, and Democrats wouldn't do that. Before we go, we've been well over an hour. It's always great chatting with you, Kirsten. I just want to respond briefly to what you were saying about the Greens. I get it. There are many, many aspects of the Green Party that frustrate me. I work with them, and I see some of the positions they take, and I'm like, these aren't, I don't necessarily disagree with you, but these aren't you're not putting front and center the issues that I think could motivate voters to actually consider voting Green.
Uh-huh.
All that said, the reason I champion the Green Party is because I just don't see an alternative that could even work. We talk about Bernie, but Bernie was destroyed by the Democratic leadership. I do like Zoran Mamdani. I have concerns about Mamdani. I feel like he may become, if you have one bright, shiny, fresh, tasty apple in a barrel full of rotten, wormy ones, I think the fresh ones more likely to go bad than the wormy ones are going to be suddenly magically transformed into delicious, fresh apples. So I think that's what we would be more likely to see with Mamdani. But I like him. I would certainly vote for him if I lived there. I just don't think the Democratic Party is a vessel that can take us to a better place. I think it will take us to a worse place than we are now. And so that's really why I say let's build up the Green Party, because I don't know what other choices we have.
I guess I would just urge, let's be strategic about how we do that by working for instant runoff voting, working for mechanisms that can allow them to be powerful, because just running Jill Stein for the how many umpteenth time, it's not moving the needle as far as I can see.
Well, let me just say, you live in Maryland, I do too. We both like Andy. There he is, the Baltimore Sun, running for governor. So it's not a national race; it's a state one. And I will have Andy back on. He's a friend of Halitics as well. Great. With his new candidate. So pretty exciting stuff. And
yes.
Hopefully he can make some inroads.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, before we go, I had this one story. I sort of wanted to show you this headline up because I think you and I do model, I hope, a certain degree of civility in our discussion. But these issues, we're talking about truly existential issues. We're talking about speciesism of the worst sort, where humans put our species ahead of all others. And we're also talking about a genocide where we put specific identities above the right of other identities to even survive, even to live. In this kind of a world, is Roxane Gay? I don't know if that's how she pronounces her name. It's Roxane. I don't have her name. She wrote this piece. Is she right? Should we not even strive for civility, given how serious, even existential, the crises are that we face?
I don't have an answer for that. I mean, my personal style is to be civil, because I think, at least, I guess because I'm in a protected bubble. Here I am in Tacoma Park. Most people are in somewhat left of center, at least. So, it's a little bit more gentrified and less of a progressive haven than it once was. But where does it get you? Like, the other side will always be outgunned, out-financed, out brutal. I mean, I guess if you talk about Israel-Palestine, we're well past the point where civility has gotten us anywhere. I'm sort of hoping for the UN to go in there and level the playing field a little bit. I don't know. I don't know. I guess
it's tough. I mean, I think the problem with incivility, and I'm often not on this show. You've always said, "Oh, you're always nice." Well, I try, but sometimes I'm not. It doesn't make things better. You don't convince people if your goal is to persuade people. Now, Charlie Kirk was so uncivil. This is one of the things I find very frustrating about this article, is the right saying, "Oh, we have to be civil. He was so rude. He talked over people. He never listened. He never conceded a point. He was unbelievably uncivil. And his solution, he was dishonest. I mean, there was nothing civil about his style. But I think maybe Gay's point, which I do sort of take seriously, is it's easy for those in power to say, yeah, let's be polite, let's be civil, because that's worked for them.
Right.
Although the Republicans never are civil. Now that they're in power, they want you to be polite to them. But I think I will take a little issue. Now, you're saying in Tacoma Park, it's okay, it's easier to be civil. I'll bet if you started promoting a really aggressive, anti-Israel, I don't know what you say in public, but a lot of people would get even those Democrats, or you start saying, look, Kamala brought it on herself. No, it wasn't. If you say it this way, it wasn't racism. It wasn't sexism. She was a terrible candidate. She ran an awful campaign. And I can understand perfectly well why a lot of working class people voted for her. If you said that, which is perfectly civil, a lot of people would get very angry very quickly and start trying to shout you down or cancel you.
That's absolutely a good point. Yep. And again, that's testament to the power of propaganda. You know, Israel is such a powerful propaganda machine that even progressive American Jews or progressive American Democrats are sort of buying into it, that any criticism of a genocidal regime amounts to anti-Semitism. And you're absolutely right. That's a good reminder. I was thinking more about climate, like everybody's got their electric vehicles and they're on board with that. But you're absolutely right. That there's a place where civility breaks down, and in those cases, yeah, you have to be on the right side of history. You have to speak up for what's right, and sort of on the same theme of messaging. I think this is sort of an important point. Like we were talking about the abundance agenda, this abundance, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, which was the thing we talked about last time, and someone asked Derek Thompson in some public forum, well, the Republicans are really good at storytelling. Like, how do we tell a story to help Democrats start winning again? And Derek Thompson said, stories are for children. And it was just such a phenomenally out of touch thing to say about the power of messaging. And it's clear for whatever else you can say about Donald Trump, and you can say a lot of horrible, truthful things. He's a master of storytelling. He managed to convince working class people that the threat to them was not, the top 1% taking 90% of the economic growth. The threat to them is actually immigrants. We're doing jobs that the white working class doesn't want to do anyway, of course. That's a story. That's a narrative that's been successful for the right wing, for the GOP. What are the Democrats' stories? I don't know. What are they? Well, Derek Thompson says we don't need them. And I think that's just an example of the sort of out of touch, obtuse, like my mom used to call it limousine liberalism, like just the corporate Democrats. We've got two parties that are vying for the corporations. The Democrats are going to continue losing. Why would you choose Republican? If you're a Republican, why would you choose Republican light when you can have the real thing?
100%. And I think that you're talking about the power of Trump's messaging and stories. I think a big reason for them is he had the whole playing field. It's just like you said. I mean, I've said this before. You can't beat something with nothing. So you might have a narrative or story that you could poke a million holes in and say, this isn't true and that's false and this, but where's your counter? Where's your story that will have more appeal? Where's your story about workers who can't take a break for 8 hours, who are wearing diapers to work? Why aren't you talking about that? Because they have no alternative. Why don't you talk? Kamala for a moment did talk about the oligopolies in the grocery business and how prices were way too high in part because of, Safeway. Safeway owns Albertsons and Safeway, and I guess there's some others. So there's really only one option in a lot of areas, one purveyor. She talked a little bit about that, and then she just stopped talking about it. So if you have one story and maybe it's not a very even appealing one to a lot of people, but it's the only one, they're going to listen.
Exactly. The power of storytelling. All good propagandists appreciate this, and the Democrats would do well to take some courses in propaganda, because that is how you turn minds and hearts, and you craft a story. Bernie Sanders is out there barnstorming, while the Democrats are flailing around. He's drawing tens of thousands to his rallies because he tells a story that resonates, which is that you have been working people in this country have been skimmed dry by both parties over the past 50 years of administrations. Like there's been no benefits to the working class from a stagnant minimum wage, corporate-owned healthcare, just an absolutely fraying social safety net. Those are the stories that people resonate with because they're experiencing them. And if the Democrats,
well, and actually, Zoran Mamdani was told a story which he put in an ad of why the halal chicken, which you don't eat, but which a lot of New Yorkers do, why it's so expensive. And he went through this whole, why is it $12, $12.95 to just get a little gyro with some chicken in it? And he went through it. And it was a powerful story. It spoke to people because it talked about to their day-to-day existence. So all that. So, I want to finish with this, and I'll give you the last word as always. And I think this may be why I'm less critical of the Green Party than you are. At least I'm more willing to embrace it. I believe the reason the Democrats don't tell stories is because the kind of stories that would resonate with people gore their own ox. Just like you were even saying, they're a billionaire party. You start telling stories about how people are exploited at their jobs, how they're paying too much because of the monopolist. Those are the people who contribute to the Democrat Party, who buy the politicians when they're running for office and then give them golden parachutes when they lose elections. They're not going to. They'd rather risk losing elections knowing that their own personal fortune is secure than the opposite. That's why I'm like, well, there's no hope in this party. That's why we have to go to the Greens, despite all the flaws, which you very accurately, in my view, Kirsten, set forth.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's hard to argue with any of what you said. I guess my only argument would be Zoran Mamdani is looking like he's going to win.
And he's a Democrat.
Yes. And so we had AOC for a little while, you can say what you want. Ilhan Omar, there's a few bright spots in there who are Democrats who won their elections. We don't see the Greens anywhere because we don't have the infrastructure to allow them in. We have to build that infrastructure. We have to get our instant runoff voting, our ranked choice voting. We do that. Here in Tacoma Park, we have ranked choice voting. So what a great step in the right direction. You can actually vote for your preferred candidate rather than the lesser of two evils. So please, Green Party, focus on building that infrastructure.
Well, they are, to be fair, let me just say because I'm active in the Montgomery County Greens, and we are actually really pushing to get IRV, RCV, instant runoff voting, ranked choice voting here. And that's, by the way, what was Zoran won in the Democratic primary.
Okay. So, fantastic.
In Manhattan. Final word from you, Kirsten Stade. Always great to have you on. Anything you want to that I didn't let you get in, I cut you off, or that you feel you want to just throw out on the fire before we say goodbye?
We talk about how grim it can be to listen to people like us, and it is. I want people to understand about the renewable energy transition, that it's not what Bill McKibben makes it out to be. There is no way to a sustainable future with our population where it is, with continually growing economic growth and continually growing population. Our entire focus needs to be on contraction of our economy and our population by design, not disaster. And that means empowering people to make their own reproductive choices, celebrating declining birth rates, encouraging a focus on meeting basic needs of all rather than high consumption demands of the very few.
Thank you so much. Kirsten Stade with us. I think her answer to can solar save us is no, solar alone can't, but we should consume obviously much less fossil fuels and everything else. Thank you all so much for being part of Halitics. I will be back tomorrow. I think it's just Hal tomorrow, so I'm kind of excited about that. After 3 great guests this week, Carlos, Arlen, and today, Kirsten Stade.